I'm painting the shiplap ahead of time. Alternately, you can paint it once you get it up there, but the shiplap I'm using is primed only and can't be exposed to the outdoor elements for a long period of time. And I know it's going to take me a while to get up there and paint that thing. I started my install along the front wall and worked my way to the fascia. This meant that after installing all the full courses that I could, I would have an 1.5 inch strip left right there at that fascia area. When you measure for your cut, make sure you're measuring to the center of the joist. There's 2 different lengths of shiplap I'm using, 8 feet and 12 feet. When you're doing these measurements, you'll have a long board and a shorter one. When you do the next course of shiplap, make sure you alternate the sides so you're staggering the joints. Use construction adhesive and galvanized nails to install the shiplap. There's a corresponding article link in the description if you want more information on why I made the choices I made on installing the shiplap this way. Before we can move on to the back soffit install, we need to bump out the wall side of the side soffit so we have something to nail to later. You'll see how we're going to use these later. Oh, and if you want to continue a trend of excessiveness, make sure you're gluing and nailing the 2x4s in place. We're going to install the only full width course of shiplap on the back this time. We'll do all the rip cuts at once later. We'll do one side of the shed at a time. Take a couple measurements from different spots and then come up with a single measurement for the whole side. When you're measuring the side pieces, give yourself a little wiggle room. I subtracted 3/16 of an inch from mine to account for any variation in construction. After that first cut worked out pretty good, I set up a stop block with some scrap 2x4 to make all the other cuts faster. We'll install side pieces until you're about 2 feet away from that back shiplap course. This will be where we make small adjustments on 4 pieces of side shiplap instead of doing it all on one, so it's not that noticeable. Alright, so let's get going on these custom rip cuts. We'll do the front and back first since they're the easiest. Measure in a couple places and use the smallest measurement. Don't worry if you have a little gap. We'll use some caulk later to make things look uniform. I'm cutting the boards to the same lengths that we used before. Most importantly, remember which side of the board you need to rip. If you gotta go back out there to double check, it's totally worth it. Before you start gluing and nailing things in place, do a test fit and then remember to stagger the joints for the final placement. You'll do the same thing for finishing the back soffit area. So there was an area in the back that had a little more variation in width than the others that I had measured. I had to loosen the fascia to get the shiplap in place, kind of because I was getting a little sloppy on my test fits and didn't go all the way out there to make sure that it fit. Alternately, if I had run into this, I would have just trimmed it down a little bit more or just taken a hand plane to make it fit right. The reason the cuts on the side soffit are more complicated is that we have to replicate the rabbet on one side of the shiplap. We're going to modify one side of the shiplap. I chose to cut and modify the rabbet that faces down. Make sure you measure the soffit gap on each of the sides. I can almost guarantee they're not going to be the same. When you figure out how much to remove from each of the 4 boards, don't forget to account for the 1/16 inch nickel gap. That's that gap that you see in between each of the boards when they're installed. So as an example, let's say you needed to take 1/2 inch off of each of the boards. To account for that nickel gap, you'll take 9/16 off instead. I'm recreating the rabbet by doing multiple passes on the table saw and then doing some cleanup with a chisel. I recommend you doing this also. Before I did all the real cuts, I made a mock section with a bunch of scrap pieces just to make sure that it would all work out. Once everything is cut, do one last dry fit and then glue and nail them in place. Last thing to do is to use some exterior caulk to make all the seams look uniform. Just try not to get it in the nickel gap. This part of the project was right around $216, bringing the project total to $5,141. Well, I'd like to say thank you for watching. Barda's Adopt-A-Shop Helper cameos next. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Get out there, make something, and we'll see you next time.